The Sahara Desert is the largest hot desert on Earth, a vast and unforgiving expanse of sand, rock, and scorching heat that stretches across the entire width of the African continent, from the Atlantic Ocean to west of the Red Sea in the east, covering an area of more than 9 million square kilometers, an area that is roughly the size of the entire United States. It is a place of unimaginable extremes, where temperatures can soar to over 50 degrees Celsius during the day and plummet to near freezing at night, where sandstorms can rage for days, obliterating everything in their path, where water is scarcer than gold and life hangs by a thread. For centuries, the Sahara has been a symbol of desolation, emptiness, and hopelessness, a place where nothing of value can exist and where no civilization can thrive. But beneath the seemingly barren and lifeless surface lies a secret that is so vast, so shocking, and so potentially transformative that it could reshape the global economy, redraw the geopolitical map of Africa, and change the lives of billions of people around the world. The secret buried under the Sahara Desert is not oil. It is not gas. It is not gold or diamonds or any of the other precious minerals that have driven conflict and exploitation across the continent for centuries. The secret is far more valuable, far more essential, and far more urgently needed by a world that is rapidly running out of the very thing that makes life possible on this planet. The secret is water. Vast, unimaginable, almost incomprehensible quantities of fresh water, trapped deep beneath the desert sands of millennia, a massive subterranean lake that stretches across thousands of miles and contains more water than all the surface lakes and rivers on the African continent combined. This hidden reservoir, known as the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system, is one of the largest underground water reserves on Earth, containing an estimated 150,000 cubic kilometers of fresh water, enough to irrigate vast swathes of agricultural land, to supply the drinking water needs of millions of people for centuries, and to transform the entire region from a desert wasteland into a fertile and prosperous breadbasket that could feed the world. The world is only just beginning to wake up to the existence of this hidden treasure. For decades, the aquifer was a geological curiosity, a footnote in scientific journals, a subject of academic debate that attracted little attention from governments, corporations, or the general public. But as the global water crisis deepens, as climate change intensifies, as droughts become more frequent and more severe, and as the populations of Africa and the Middle East continue to explode, the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system is suddenly emerging as one of the most strategically important and politically contentious resources on the planet. The nations that sit above this vast subterranean lake, Egypt, Libya, Sudan, and Chad, are acutely aware of its potential, and they are engaged in a tense and fragile negotiation over how to share its waters, a negotiation that could easily spiral into conflict, destabilizing an already volatile region, and triggering a water war that would have devastating consequences for the entire world. The Sahara Desert is not a wasteland. It is a treasure trove, and the treasure is water. The question is whether humanity will use this treasure wisely, or whether it will squander in the same reckless way that has squandered so many of the planet's finite resources, fighting over it, wasting it, and poisoning it until there is nothing left but desert, sand, and regret. To fully understand the significance of the secret buried under the Sahara Desert, we must first travel back in time to an era when the Sahara was not a desert at all, but a lush and verdant savanna, teeming with wildlife, dotted with lakes and rivers, and home to thriving human civilizations that hunted, farmed, and traded across the vast expanse of North Africa. This was a period known as the African Humid Period, a time when the monsoon rains were stronger and more reliable, when the Sahara was covered in grasslands and woodlands, when elephants, giraffes, and hippos roamed freely, and when the ancestors of the modern Egyptian, Libyan, Sudanese, and Chadian peoples lived in flourishing communities, building societies that were as sophisticated as any that existed in Europe or Asia at the time. The climate of the Sahara began to shift about 5,000 years ago, as the monsoon rains weakened and the grasslands gradually gave way to desert. The lakes and rivers dried up, the forests receded, and the human populations were forced to retreat to the edges of the desert, seeking refuge in the Nile Valley, the oases, and the coastal regions that could still support life. But the water did not disappear entirely. As the surface water evaporated, it seeped into the ground, percolating to the porous sandstone rock that lies beneath the desert sands, accumulating over millennia into vast subterranean reservoirs that are now the source of the hidden treasure that lies beneath the Sahara. The existence of these groundwater reserves has been known for centuries, but it was only in the middle of the 20th century that their true magnitude began to be understood. Oil prospectors, drilling deep into the desert in search of petroleum, were stunned to discover vast quantities of fresh water at depths of hundreds of meters, water that was so pure that it could be drunk without treatment, water that had been trapped underground for more than 10,000 years, water that was virtually pristine and untouched by human activity. The discovery set off a wave of scientific interest and exploration, revealing the true extent of the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system and sparking a debate about its potential that continues to this day. The political implications of the discovery were immediate and profound. The nations that share the aquifer, Egypt, Libya, Sudan, and Chad, began to view the water as a national asset, a strategic resource that was essential for their survival and prosperity. The Libyan government launched the Great Man-Made River Project, an ambitious scheme to extract water from the aquifer and pipe it to the Mediterranean coast, transforming the desert into farmland. The Egyptian government began to explore the potential of the aquifer for irrigation and drinking water, recognizing that it could provide a vital buffer against the growing water scarcity that was threatening the country's future. And the Sudanese and Chadian governments began to plan for the exploitation of their own shares of the aquifer, realizing that it could provide the water needed to fuel their own development. The stage was set for a competition that could easily escalate into a conflict that would pit nation against nation in a struggle for the most essential resource on Earth. The secret buried under the Sahara was out, and the world was not prepared for consequences. The hidden power of the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system lies not just in its immense size, but in its strategic location and its potential to reshape the geopolitics of an entire continent. The aquifer stretches across more than 2 million square kilometers, spanning for countries that are among the poorest and most unstable on Earth, countries that are plagued by poverty, corruption, conflict, and climate change, countries that are desperately in need of water to irrigate their crops, to supply their cities, and to sustain their populations. The nations that control the aquifer or that can access its waters will have a significant advantage over their neighbors, a source of leverage that could be used to extract concessions, to build alliances, or to dominate the region. The first hidden layer is the sheer quantity of water. The Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system contains an estimated 150,000 cubic kilometers of fresh water, a volume that is roughly equivalent to the annual flow of the Nile River over a period of 500 years. This is enough water to irrigate millions of hectares of agricultural land, to supply the drinking water needs of hundreds of millions of people for centuries, and to transform a region from a net importer of food into a net exporter. The potential is enormous, but it is also limited by the fact that the water is non-renewable, a finite resource that is being extracted at an increasing rate, and that will eventually run out. The second hidden layer is the cost of extraction. The water is buried deep underground, at depths of up to 1,000 meters, and extracting it requires enormous amount of energy and expensive infrastructure. The Libyan Great Man-Made River Project, which is one of the largest civil engineering projects in history, cost more than $20 billion to build and requires a vast network of pipelines, pumping stations, and maintenance facilities to operate. The cost of extraction is a significant barrier to the development of the aquifer, limiting the ability of the poorest countries to access its waters and creating a situation where the wealthy and powerful nations are able to monopolize the resource. The third hidden layer is the political and legal framework governing the aquifer. There is currently no comprehensive international agreement governing the sharing of the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system, and the 4 countries that share it have been unable to agree on a fair and equitable distribution of its waters. The negotiations have been slow, contentious, and overshadowed by the broader political tensions that are plaguing the region, raising the risk of a conflict that could destabilize the region and trigger a humanitarian catastrophe. The lack of a formal agreement is a dangerous void that is being exploited by the strongest and most powerful nations at the expense of the weakest and most vulnerable. The fourth hidden layer is the potential for the aquifer to exacerbate existing conflicts. The region is already plagued by wars, terrorism, and political instability, and the introduction of a new and highly valuable resource could easily intensify these conflicts, creating new fault lines and exacerbating old grievances. The international community has not yet fully grasped the implications of the aquifer, but it is beginning to recognize that the hidden power of the Sahara could easily become a source of conflict rather than a source of peace. The hidden power of the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system is immense, but is also a source of immense risk. The world is only beginning to understand the true significance of the secret buried under Sahara, and it is not yet prepared for consequences. The impact of the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system is not confined to the 4 countries that share its waters. The ripple effects of the secret buried under the Sahara are spreading across the globe, affecting global food prices, international trade, geopolitical alliances, and the very fabric of international law and governance. The world is beginning to realize that the Sahara is not a desert, but a source of power that could transform the global order and reshape the future of the planet. The first ripple is global food security. The Sahara, if properly irrigated, could become one of the largest agricultural regions on Earth, producing vast quantities of wheat, corn, vegetables, and fruit that could feed millions of people around the world. The potential for the region to become a global breadbasket is immense, but also carries significant risks. The water is finite, and the intensive irrigation required to sustain agriculture could quickly deplete the aquifer, leaving the region with a devastated ecosystem and a bankrupt economy. The balance between agricultural development and water conservation is delicate, and the world is only beginning to understand the complexities of managing such a vast and valuable resource. The second ripple is geopolitical stability. The region surrounding the Sahara is one of the most volatile and conflict-prone areas on Earth, and the introduction of a new and valuable resource could easily exacerbate existing tensions, creating new sources of conflict and instability. The competition for water could become a proxy war, with the major powers competing for influence in the region, supporting their allies and undermining their rivals. The risk of a water war in the Sahara is real, and the consequences will be devastating, not just for the region, but for the entire world. The third ripple is the global water crisis. The world is running out of water. The global population is growing. The climate is changing, and the demand for water is increasing at an alarming rate. The Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system represents one of the last great untapped reserves of fresh water on the planet, and the way it is managed will set a precedent for the management of other finite water resources around the world. The lessons learned in the Sahara will be applied to the management of aquifers in China, India, the United States, and elsewhere, and the success or failure of the project will determine the future of global water governance. The fourth ripple is the international legal framework governing transboundary resources. The Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system is a transboundary resource, crossing national borders and requiring international cooperation to manage effectively. The lack of a comprehensive legal framework is a dangerous void that could be exploited by the strongest and most powerful nations, and the development of such a framework is essential for the peaceful and equitable management of the resource. The legal and diplomatic challenges are immense, but they are also an opportunity to build a new model of international cooperation that can be applied to other transboundary resources around the world. The global ripple of the secret buried under Sahara is spreading, touching every nation, every economy, and every person on the planet. And the effects are only going to intensify as the water crisis deepens, and the world scrambles to adapt to a future of scarcity and conflict. And yet, despite the immense promise and the immense risk of the Nubian Sandstone Aquifer system, there is still a path forward, a path that could allow the nations of the Sahara to manage their water resources sustainably, to share them equitably, and to build a future of peace, prosperity, and cooperation. But this path requires a fundamental shift in the way the world thinks about water, a shift from competition to cooperation, from exploitation to conservation, and from conflict to peace. The nations of the Sahara are facing a critical choice, and the decisions they make in the coming years will determine the fate of the region and the future of the world. The first critical pivot is the development of a comprehensive legal framework for the management of the aquifer. The nations of the Sahara must agree on a fair and equitable distribution of the water, a framework that takes into account the needs of all parties, the sustainability of the resource, and the long-term interests of the region. The negotiations will be difficult, and the process will be fraught with tension, but the alternative, a chaotic and unregulated race to extract as much water as possible, would be disastrous. The second critical pivot is the investment in sustainable extraction and efficient use of water. The water in the aquifer is finite, and it must be used wisely and efficiently. The nations of Sahara must invest in modern irrigation technologies, water conservation measures, and alternative water sources, such as desalination and wastewater treatment. The cost of these investments is high, but the cost of inaction is much higher. The third critical pivot is the development of alternative sources of income and economic growth. The nations of Sahara must not become dependent on the water, the aquifer, but must diversify their economies, investing in industry, technology, and education. The water should be a resource that enables development, not a resource that defines it. The fourth critical pivot is the building of trust and cooperation between the nations of the region. The history of the region is one of conflict and mistrust, and the nations of Sahara must overcome their historical grievances and build a new relationship based on mutual respect and shared interests. The challenges are immense, but the opportunities are even greater. The pivot is possible, but it will not happen on its own. It requires leadership, vision, and the courage to make difficult choices. As we stand at this critical juncture, the future of Sahara and the world forks into two distinct paths, two completely different destinies. In the first path, the nations of Sahara agree on a fair and equitable sharing of the aquifer's waters, invest in sustainable extraction and efficient use, and build a future of peace, prosperity, and cooperation. The Sahara becomes a breadbasket. The nations of the region become prosperous and stable, and the global water crisis is mitigated by the lessons learned from the Sahara experience. In the second path, the nations of the Sahara fail to agree on a sharing framework. The competition for water escalates into conflict, the aquifer is depleted, and the region descends into chaos. The global water crisis deepens. The world is plagued by drought and famine, and the lessons of the Sahara are a cautionary tale of failure. The question is not whether the Sahara will be developed. The question is whether it will be developed wisely. The map never lies, but the people drawing it always have a reason. We just saw the $1 trillion secret buried under the Sahara Desert, but there is one nation quietly watching and preparing to exploit it. That is the next journey. Which future do you believe? Comment Future 1 or Future 2, and subscribe to Atlas Beyond so you never miss the next journey.